Hail travelers, and welcome to the Knight's Realm. Here in the realm of Camelot, I, the Guardian Knight, venture deep into the archives of popular culture and entertainment to bring you all my own perspective on such matters. Some time ago, I made a video analyzing the psychology of Starscream across most of his iterations. I came to the conclusion that he was a true narcissist and used examples from each of the shows I spoke of alongside the various symptoms of NPD. However, there is one Starscream who doesn't quite fit this mold, one driven not by narcissism, a hunger for power, or arrogance, but rather one driven by something more relatable, a desire to be accepted and appreciated. This is the tragic story of Transformers Armada's take on Air Commander Starscream. Before we get started, I want to shout out my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you to Loser, SK, and Jacob Sheets. Now, join me as we delve deep beneath the castle and begin our quest. After Transformers Generation 1 ended, the IP ended up in the hands of Japanese creators. Every series between 1986 and the turn of the 21st century, with the exceptions of Beast Wars and Beast Machines, were solely Japanese productions, each intended to continue the story of G1. From headmasters to car robots, the Transformers universe was fleshed out. New generations of Autobots and Decepticons gave way to Maximals and Predacons, until eventually the Autobots returned under Fire Convoy to fight the Predacons under Gigatron, with the Decepticons returning under Black Convoy, or Scourge. With the ending of car robots, known in the States as Robots in the Skies, the G1 cartoon continuity finally came to a close after 17 years. While RID-01 was a continuation of G1 in Japan, it was its own continuity in the States, with Fire Convoy being called Optimus Prime and Gigatron being called Megatron. For American audiences, this was the first time that they had seen a new Transformers continuity outside of the comics. RID wasn't as popular as its predecessors, though. It was your standard Japanese fighting robot anime, just with a Transformers flair, meaning it had a rather niche audience in 2001. In 2002, however, Transformers would soar to new heights of popularity, drawing a whole new generation, a generation which includes yours truly, into the franchise. Transformers Armada, or Transformers Legends of the Microns as it was known in Japan, was a joint effort between American and Japanese studios Hasbro and Takara, the first of its kind, and the first intentional foray into an entirely new continuity. The story returned the characters to basics and brought back several popular characters, though with new designs. Optimus Prime, Megatron, Red Alert, Cyclonus, Thrust, Smokescreen, Hotshot, wait, who? Ah, yes. Since Bumblebee had not been used in Transformers media since his reconstruction into Goldbug in Season 3's finale, Hasbro had lost the rights to the name. This is part of the reason why, ever since Transformers 07, Bumblebee has been included in everything. Every show, every toy line, every film, and he's never been killed, or at least has never stayed dead, partially because Hasbro doesn't want to lose their rights to the character. The only other Autobot, aside from Optimus, because, he's the leader, with as much ubiquity as Bumblebee is Ratchet. Anyway, in place of Bumblebee, an amalgam character was made between Bee and Hot Rod, known as Hotshot. In Japan, he was just Hot Rod. Anyway, each of these characters appeared. Some were barely changed, like Optimus. Others were entirely unrecognizable, both in design and character, like Cyclonus. And still others, while they had changed drastically, still somehow resembled their legacy counterparts, like Megatron, whose design homaged the G2 comic color scheme and some of the Beast Wars features, with the head being patterned off of Transmetal 2 Megatron, specifically his dragon form with the horns. And though it was no longer on his arm, his fusion cannon made an appearance as well, now underslung. But this video isn't about Megatron, though I would like to talk about him at some point. No, it's about his loyal second-in-command, Starscream. While Starscream's appearance is actually rather similar to his G1 counterpart, with more red, black instead of blue, and the null rays now mounted on his shoulders, the character is quite different, and yet not too different. Transformers Armada did something very interesting with its three main legacy characters, Starscream, Optimus, and Megatron. In both their designs and their characters, it called back to the original in general terms, but in specific terms it tweaked them. For Optimus, he still had the grill abs and something on his chest, but it was his headlights instead of his windows. And for his character, he was still the hero, the one who fought for peace and for Cybertron, yet a part of him liked fighting. Megatron, his cannon is present, and he still turns into a weapon, just a tank instead of a gun, but his colors are now the opposite of Optimus, red and blue versus green and purple. A common villain-hero dichotomy. Look no further than Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, Superman and Brainiac or Lex Luthor, or for just Red vs. Green, Iron Man and Titanium Man, Captain America, and classic Red Skull in his green jumpsuit, etc. As for his character, while he is still a conquering warlord, he's not as unhinged as prior versions. This is perhaps the most sane Megatron, at least in Armada. Energon would ruin that, and many other things. And for Starscream, I already mentioned his design, but in terms of character, he is still the disloyal, somewhat power-hungry lieutenant. So, what's changed? His motive. Where Starscream usually betrays Megatron out of a lust for power or a narcissistic belief that he deserves to lead, one that may or may not be rooted in classism, as Megatron was a former laborer, and Starscream was a decorated commander even before the war. This version of the character is different. When the story begins, Starscream is as loyal to Megatron as any of his soldiers, if not more so, dedicated to fulfilling his master's orders and seizing the Minicons for the Decepticon cause. However, it soon becomes apparent that Megatron doesn't appreciate his lieutenant's efforts. Starscream is consistently ridiculed for his actions, successful or not, and seeing as how this is an action cartoon from 2002, he has a lot more failures than successes. And he takes that scorn very personally. We see this as early as the first few episodes, in which each Autobot and Decepticon tries to claim their own Minicon partner. It soon reaches the point where Starscream is the only one of the Decepticons without a partner. He begins to bristle against the ridicule from his fellow soldiers and the constant criticism of his actions from Megatron. When a Minicon lays in his reach in the episode Jungle, he defies Autobot and Decepticon alike to claim Swindle, the Minicon, for himself, using the powers he was granted to rain down fire on his enemies. While all bots show excitement at claiming a Minicon partner, Starscream's elation is far more intense than anyone else's. Later on in the Saber arc, the first real consistent storyline of Armada, when the show really started to get good, Screamer's drive only increases. After the legendary sword has been formed, Hotshot claims it for himself. The young Autobot believes himself to be invincible with the weapon, and so becomes quite arrogant. He and Starscream face each other in sword duels a few times, Screamer being defeated each time. Yet with each defeat, Starscream's drive to win only grows. It reaches a point where even Optimus has to admit that despite Hotshot's power, Starscream may still win, simply because he has more to prove. Optimus is proven right. Eventually, Hotshot is led into a trap by the double agent Sideways. He is able to hold off all the cons, even Megatron, but when he at last comes face to face with Starscream, he is defeated, partially thanks to Sideways' betrayal. The sword falls into Starscream's hands, and the Decepticon jet is once more elated. Seeing his servant in possession of greater power than he, Megatron becomes incensed and devises a plan to paint Starscream as unworthy of the weapon so he can claim it for himself. He leads the Decepticons into a foggy region and manipulates Starscream into thinking his fellows are Autobots. This is sufficient to convince the other cons of Starscream's incompetence, and he is forced to hand the Starsaber over to Megatron, feeding his wounded ego and setting a fire of resentment in Starscream's spark. After a string of battles go against the team's favor, Megatron begins to take out his frustration on his soldiers, Starscream in particular. Sideways, who secretly is in league with Unicron, stokes the fires of dissent between these two, planting the idea of taking over in Starscream's mind and the idea that Starscream wants to take over in Megatron's. Though Starscream remains loyal despite his misgivings, Megatron feels it is necessary to put his servant in his place, and does so rather brutally. Though the Decepticons seem more united after Megatron's disciplinary actions, Starscream's resentment only grows. Megatron never gives him any praise for success, and punishes him severely for failure. Too severely. This Starscream may be loyal, but loyalty can only go so far when one is being treated like a dog. After the arrival of the tactician Thrust, the Decepticons are able to root out Sideways and expose his treachery. Unfortunately, the damage he did was irreparable. The Decepticons concoct a scheme to claim the other Minicon weapons, the Requiem Blaster and Skyboom Shield, a scheme that requires sending Starscream on a doomed mission. Starscream lures the Autobots out, thinking that his allies have his back, while Megatron and his men sneak into the Autobot base to steal the blaster, which is only guarded by Smokescreen. Starscream is swiftly overwhelmed, but continues fighting despite Optimus attempting to reason with him, because Optimus gonna Optimus. Eventually, Prime is able to open Starscream's eyes to the truth, and the Decepticon screams out into the void, asking Megatron why he abandoned him. The next episode, Starscream returns to the Decepticon base, where Megatron and Thrust placate him dismissively. Finally fed up with this mistreatment, Starscream decides to defect, to join the side that has a leader who actually cares for his troops, the Autobots. Though Optimus is willing to accept Starscream into their ranks, believing that everyone has the capacity to change, the other Autobots are unsure. Scavenger, Red Alert, Sideswipe, and Jetfire bite their tongues, metaphorically, out of respect for their leader, with Scavenger actually being more open to the idea as he had once been a Decepticon himself. Hotshot, on the other hand, shows no respect. He blames Starscream for Smokescreen's near death, as the Seeker had been sent to distract the Autobots, allowing Megatron to deal the near-fatal blow. Optimus orders that Hotshot suck it up and accept Starscream as one of them, but the young bot refuses to listen and challenges Starscream to a duel. The fight is interrupted by a newly repaired Smokescreen, or hoist, and the two are forced to put aside their differences and work together. The Autobots then infiltrate the Decepticon base, aided by Starscream's knowledge of and access to the facility. While the others focus on saving the Minicons, Starscream has another goal: revenge. It is soon obvious that the reason he defected was not because he believed in the Autobot cause, but because he wants to destroy Megatron. And who could blame him? After everything he had been put through, it makes sense that he'd want to repay his leader for it. But that's not how the Autobots do things. Starscream has an amazingly shot encounter with Megatron at the end of the episode, but is soon given an ultimatum by Optimus. Either he's in, or he's out. And if he's in, he's going to fight for the Minicons, for Earth, and for freedom, not for vengeance or power. Starscream is torn, knowing that he doesn't want to rejoin Megatron, but feeling that he's not a true Autobot either. It doesn't help that only Optimus, Hotshot, who has gotten over his beef, and the humans, particularly Alexis, really like the idea of Starscream being there. The others still see him as an outsider, and even Scavenger, who himself was a defector, isn't really doing much to make him feel welcome. To be fair, Starscream's standoffishness isn't doing him any favors either, though it doesn't deter Alexis or Hotshot, and Optimus is just glad to have him on their side. Starscream is eventually forced onto a mission to Mars along with Jetfire, as they are the only two Autobots capable of flight. On this mission, Starscream ends up giving in to his softer side, realizing that the Minicons aren't weapons to be used as tools like the Decepticons see them, but allies in the fight for freedom. Despite his misgivings with the less ruthless aspects of the Autobots, he can't help but admit that they're on the right side. But still he wonders if he belongs. One aspect of Transformers lore that drives Starscream's dilemma is the concept of your programming or function. In the Aligned and IDW continuities, the Functionists attempted to keep all Cybertronians in castes based on their function, their programming, thus creating a restrictive system that both Optimus, or Orion, and Megatron, or Megatronus, bristled against. Functionism doesn't exist in the Unicron trilogy, but the idea is present, funnily enough, in Megatron and the Decepticons. Starscream is convinced that his programming as a Decepticon warrior means that he must always be a Decepticon warrior. It's not because he believes in the cause, he doesn't, or because he hates Optimus, again, he doesn't. It's because he thinks that he was forced as a Decepticon, so he must always be a Decepticon. It's an incredibly tragic concept, like the reverse Parthenax. Can someone truly defy their nature, or must they succumb to it? I believe that, yes, people, robots, and dragons can all defy their natures if they choose to, and Optimus clearly believes the same. Unfortunately, at this point, Starscream doesn't. When Thrust offers Starscream an opportunity to rejoin the Decepticons, bringing the Star Saber and Skyboom shield to Megatron, the Seeker unfortunately takes him up on the offer and rejoins the Cons, betraying the Autobots. Hotshot, the other humans, and Jetfire, who had also warmed up to Starscream, are all enraged, while Optimus is laden with guilt for losing this shield and sword, and Alexis is just heartbroken. Yet Starscream feels much the same. He's not the Khan he once was, and both Thrust and Megatron can tell. Of course, both are more concerned about their upcoming victory, though Thrust's victory is quite different from Megatron's, than about their prodigal comrade's mental state. Using the 9 Minicons as a power source for their new weapon, the Hydra cannon, the Decepticons attempt to destroy Earth and the Autobots in one fell swoop. Starscream is horrified by the idea, but Megatron will not be deterred. If it were not for Optimus putting himself between the blast and Earth, the Decepticons would have won the war then and there. Unfortunately, Optimus lost his life in the process, a turn of events that both Starscream and, oddly enough, Megatron are sad over. Starscream's remorse would continue to dominate his mind and spark as both Autobots and Decepticons make their way to Cybertron. While the two teams engage in a space battle, Starscream and Hotshot face each other, guilt obviously filling the Decepticons' spark. The Autobots are nearly defeated until the power of the Matrix, combined with that of the Minicons, revives Optimus. The newly returned Prime is able to defeat the Decepticons. After the battle, Hotshot and Red Alert are sucked through a portal, finding themselves on a nearby planet, where they are pursued by the murderous Nemesis Prime. a servant or manifestation of Sideways, or Unicron, or both. It's not really clear. Okay, Unicron is kind of confusing in this canon. Anyway, the Decepticons arrive, and as Megatron prepares to kill the two Autobots, Starscream interjects to save their lives. Unfortunately, Nemesis Prime proves too powerful for Autobot and Decepticon alike. Megatron, Demolisher, Starscream, and the two Autobots are severely damaged, only able to be saved by the intervention of their Minicons, who give them new upgraded appearances, causing Megatron to refer to himself as Galvatron, as he tends to do. When the Decepticons arrive on Cybertron itself, they are able to conquer it swiftly with the power of the Minicons at their disposal. Starscream continues to be torn between his spark and his programming, but soon discovers that there's another problem. Thrust, who seems to have his own agenda. When the Autobots arrive, having encountered evidence of Unicron's return, Galvatron does not believe them. Starscream, however, does, but is only able to prove it when Thrust makes his move, stealing the Skyboom shield and Requiem blaster before retreating into the catacombs beneath Cybertron. Once more, Hotshot and Starscream find themselves on the same side as they pursue the traitorous Conehead. Thrust attempts to reason with Starscream, but the Seeker refuses to join him or Unicron. This refusal nearly leads to his death, but he is saved due to the time-warping powers of the Minicon Highwire, one of many confusing things in this episode. For the first time since his redefection, Starscream is reunited with Alexis, the one human he got along with. Even after all this time, Alexis still carries the rock Starscream brought back for her from Mars in a pendant, a fact that only sways Starscream further from the cause of destruction. Alexis's faith in and love for Starscream causes him to realize that he always had the spark of an Autobot, and it was time to stop denying it. But first, Galvatron needed to be convinced of Unicron's threat. Though confronted by a myriad of evidence of the threat Unicron poses to all existence, Galvatron is unwilling to give up his fight against Optimus. Starscream attempts to convince him with words, but is batted aside, literally, as Galvatron goes to face down Prime. Starscream agonizes over what to do, with Alexis's words of encouragement running through his mind. Realizing that words will not do the trick, he decides to let his blade do the talking. As Galvatron and Optimus battle, the latter trying to defuse the situation and the former out for blood, Starscream interjects on Optimus's behalf. He and Galvatron battle, all while Starscream attempts to get through to his leader. It's not until Starscream is grievously injured by the Star Saber that Galvatron is willing to listen. Starscream lays out the situation, reminiscing on why he left the Decepticons in the first place. He says that Optimus treats his soldiers well and has integrity, unlike Megatron. Yet Starscream always wanted his leader's respect, to be good enough, but he realizes now that none of that ever mattered. All that matters is that Unicron must be destroyed, and that can only happen if Galvatron lets go of his arrogance and his hatred and joins forces with the Autobots. With a final plea of, "Please, sir, do it for me." Starscream aims his cannons upward, deciding that if he's going to die, he's going to at least try to wound Unicron. He unleashes all his strength into one final blast, a blast that tragically doesn't even reach the Dark God before Starscream is utterly and completely destroyed by the Chaosbringer's power. Optimus and Galvatron both look on in horror as Starscream, the twice Decepticon turned twice Autobot, crumbles into space dust. His final words echoing in Galvatron's mind. He lived a warrior and died a hero. Starscream's sacrifice was the final nail needed for Galvatron to lay aside his pride and accept Optimus's proposal for an alliance. If it weren't for him, the Autobots and Decepticons could never have unified in time to defeat Unicron, nor could Galvatron have come to the realization that he was the problem all along, leading to his own eventual heroic sacrifice. Starscream bridged the gap between Autobot and Decepticon with his death, bringing an end to Unicron, to the war, and ushering in an era of peace on Cybertron. Alexis never forgot Starscream and thought of him as Optimus and Galvatron made their alliance official. Even in his Unicron-induced delusion, Galvatron imagined Starscream at his side as he ruled Cybertron. In the end, Starscream was the true hero of the Unicron battles in the Cybertronian War. His legacy would be one of peace and of freedom for all sentient beings. Until Energon came along and ruined it, but that's a whole other video. Armada Starscream is a fascinating take on this iconic character, taking his treacherous nature and turning it into something noble instead of villainous. His rivalry with Megatron was less of a power-hungry subordinate and more of a soldier seeking approval from his petty and cruel commander, approval he did not receive until after he died. Starscream's arc is perhaps the greatest in this show, rivaled only by Megatron's own, and though I personally prefer the more backstabby versions of the character, this one still ranks among my favorites. Armada holds a very special place in my heart, as it was my Transformers as a kid. Though Animated, Prime, and Skybound would eventually supersede it in my personal rankings, it still resonates deeply with me. Starscream's sacrifice is up there with the deaths of Optimus in the '86 movie, Dinobot in Beast Wars, and Prowl in Animated, as some of the most heart-wrenching yet triumphant moments in Transformers history. I only wish that Energon had chosen to let him rest instead of reviving him into a characterless husk that no one really has much reaction to, especially Alexis and Hotshot. What's up with that? But I'll leave it here to not get too negative. As always, thank you all for joining me on my quest. If you enjoyed the video and like what I do here, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to support the channel further, please consider joining the Knights Realm Patreon for $1 a month, and get access to exclusive content, including videos not available on YouTube, and supercuts of my rewrites. Or if you'd like to request a future video topic or vote on pre-chosen topics, you can join at $5 a month, or leave a super thanks in the comments below. In any case, I will see you all on our next adventure, whenever that may be.